From Michigan Public, this is It's Just Politics. I'm Zoe Clark.
And I'm Rick Pluta.
And Rick Pluta, it is not hyperbole to say that this year is going to be a year unlike any other in modern Michigan political history.
True.
We have two huge open statewide races.
For governor and U.S. Senate.
The entire state legislature, both the state house and state senate, up for election.
We have open seats for Secretary of State and Attorney General.
And you, as a Michigan voter, will have the opportunity to decide whether you want to convene a convention to entirely rewrite the state's constitution.
And we're just talking about the election here.
So let's turn to two political strategists to break down the year to come in Michigan politics. John Selleck, CEO of Harbor Strategic, and Adrian Hemond, CEO of Grassroots Midwest. Together, they make the political analyst team of Baldly Bipartisan. John's the Republican, Adrian the Dem. Hello, you two.
How are you? Good day.
Good day. So, okay, let's start with you, Adrian. As we look to 2026, what is top headline for you that folks should be watching for this year?
Most important election of our lifetime, as we've been saying for the last decade. No, it's actually not the election. It's the protracted fight about how the state spends its money that is going to set the tone for a lot of what's going to happen this year and a lot of the political and electoral fights that are going to go on. It seems like we still haven't finished last year's budget. Speaker of the House, Matt Hall, and some House Republicans decided to reject a bunch of work projects spread out all over the state that are now sort of hanging fire and that are framing the budget fight we're about to have. The Consensus Revenue Estimating Conference is a week from Friday, where we're going to find out how much revenue state has got to spend. All the federal COVID money is gone, so the budget's going to be tighter. We have a lawsuit about the cannabis tax that's helping to fund the new roads plan that's going on right now that's going to frame some of this debate as well. And we have potential recession risk or a slowdown in consumer spending that's out there. And those economic stories that feed into the state budget, that's really going to call the tune that a lot of elected officials and candidates are going to dance to.
And John, let's go back to it's the economy, stupid.
Why are you calling him stupid?
When we continue to talk about affordability, a soft economy going into the midterms, that matters, particularly for incumbents, no?
Well, first of all, everybody's feeling the effects of it, and that means everybody's anxious, angry, mad, worried, afraid. That's why we're hearing news like in the last 24 hours that suddenly there's no more tariffs on Italian pasta or no more tariffs on furniture, or at least reduced. Everyone's going to be talking about cost and affordability, that's for sure. And we've got so many different historical patterns that are like running into each other in this election. And then we have a president that has a specialty of throwing out political history patterns altogether in the way that he wins. He's won Michigan 2 out of the last 3 times. He turned Michigan back into a full purple state, and he's going to matter. You have no doubt of that when you watch videos from governor candidates talking about Venezuela. When Trump acts, everybody down the ticket has to be talking about it. The other thing tied into like what Adrian's talking about, to get a little more specific, when I was thinking ahead to this year, things I'm going to watch. I worked on a lot of governor's races, and we spent a lot of time vetting potential lieutenant governor candidates. And you wanted to balance the ticket, and you wanted to have somebody that didn't have something that would be messy or mess up your campaign, somebody who was a good quality campaigner but didn't overshadow the candidate, all these different factors. But I kind of wonder, speakers of the House usually don't matter to the public in the sense that they know who they are. A lot of people are starting to know about Speaker Matt Hall, my friend and former colleague. And I kind of wonder if he will be potentially crowned the lieutenant governor in honor to any of the GOP candidates, because the Dems are looking for their version of Trump in Michigan to attack and tie things that he's done. And he's made a lot of cuts. He's kind of dodging his way through government, like Adrian talked about a little bit. Some of that's good. Some of that could be under attack. The Democrats are going to keep trying to tie and invent Matt Hall as a lieutenant governor, so to speak.
You mean sort of a three people at the top of the ticket who are going to be setting the conversation? The governor candidate, the lieutenant governor candidate, and Matt Hall.
Yeah, I think that's very possible that he has worked his way into that spot. And frankly, a lot of Republicans will probably embrace him and say, heck yeah, they got all the spending going on and nobody even knows who approved it. We do need to hold back on that. We shouldn't be spending wildly. So it's going to work in both directions. I just think that's one of my issues I'm going to watch. How involved the speaker, Matt Hall, gets into the governor's race on both sides, even without him saying a word about it.
Well, let's go back, Adrian, then to this idea of the legislature and how the legislature is or isn't working together. This past year, with divided government, we saw the fewest number of bills passed and signed by a governor in decades and decades. Some folks say that's a good thing, right? Like less state government.
Some folks name Matt Hall.
But others say, look, it is a sign of dysfunction. The fact that the budget was so late, a sign of dysfunction. Add in an election year when, again, every seat in the state house is up, every seat in the state senate. What does that mean for the dynamics of anything getting done before November in the Capitol policy-wise?
Basically, nothing's going to happen, right? There will be a lot of bloviating and a lot of talk from elected officials in the legislature on both sides of the aisle because they need things to go out and campaign on, but they're going to accomplish virtually nothing. They will pass some version of a budget because the Constitution requires them to do so. They shot a little bit past the deadline this last time. They'll certainly get it done sooner because the one thing that they both have in common is they have to go sing for their supper, right? They have to go beg the vote to retain their jobs. So that'll get them out of town even sooner this year with the budget, but they're still finishing up the budget from last year, right? The cancellation of all this work project money, those work projects were part of the budget negotiations from last year. So you go into the budget this year with way less money, much tighter spending profile you have to worry about. And the well's also been poisoned from last year's budget fight, both how long it took and the fact that one of the key pieces of negotiating it was unilaterally blown up by House Republicans last month. It's a really, really challenging spot for the legislature to be in terms of being able to accomplish anything and address a lot of the issues that are going on there that voters actually are concerned about. They don't know who these state representative and state senators are, but they know what the issues are that matter to them, and they can see that Lansing's not actually doing anything about it.
I actually think it's good for us to be cautious as people who watch the legislature every day, who worked in the legislature before, like Adrian and I both did. We're judging about, the average of 383 bills being passed every year. Now we're down to 74. When Matt Hall announced that to a group of Republicans, the room broke out into cheers because they think they want limited government. They want government to slow down and not do a bunch of crazy stuff. And I think in general terms, most people already look at Michigan, who's one of the very few states that has a, quote, full-time legislature, and they don't think they do crap anyway. So I don't know that the general public cares about that. They already have their dislike built in and suspicion of what the legislature doesn't do. I don't think that's as relevant as an issue as then, like we talked about, like with costs and prices.
But is there still maybe a window to do something like K-12 test scores is a huge issue, and people seem to be paying attention to that. Costs of housing are certainly an issue, and people are paying attention to that. Republicans and Democrats have different ideas maybe on that. But is there pressure to even do something on things like that people do seem to be talking about?
What we've been getting sort of a hint at from the governor is that she's going to talk about reading and reading scores and what she's going to do about it. And isn't that back to the future? Because my old boss, Bill Schuette, when he ran and lost against Gretchen Whitmer, ran on reading and on fixing reading. Here we are 7 years later, and now we're going to have a state of the state that's all about reading. So there are going to be some issues like that. We know the Democrats are talking a ton about housing and housing costs. I do think we'll see some of those things. The attempt to push the legislature in that direction will come from that state of the state address, but we're at the ultimate lame duck period of Governor Whitmer's time in office.
Look, the incentives aren't really there for the lawmakers to do a lot. Like the governor has some incentives to try to get things accomplished, but the lawmakers' incentives are mostly to go and get out on the campaign trail, right? And so they're going to be pretty laser focused on getting a spending plan passed. And there's a small window where some other policy accomplishment might be able to happen if they stumble into it while they're negotiating the budget. But once the budget's done, you won't see them again until after the election.
That is Adrian Heeman, and we are also joined by John Selleck. Together, they make up the political analysis team of Baldly Bipartisan. I want to talk, as you heard me say at the beginning, I'm largely obsessed with the idea of a constitutional convention. Basically, what this is, of course, is every 16 years, a question goes on the ballot, no matter what, that asks Michigan voters, do you want to convene a convention to entirely rewrite the state's constitution. We should note that the 3 times this has been put on the ballot, voters have said, no, we do not want that. But it's been by a smaller amount each time. John, I'd love to hear from you. You have seen the con-cons go down before. What are the chances that voters might think about approving it this time? And does it feed in at all to the election as a whole?
Yeah, I think it'll matter in the sense that most people are very unhappy with how things are going. They're worried about, they don't trust how government's working. As like Mike Duggan talked about, keep going in these U-turns every 2 years. We throw the baby out with the bathwater and start all over again. There could be an urge to do this. However, it's never passed in my lifetime. And the one that did happen was like in the 60s, and it only passed with 51% of the vote then. Since then, it's only got around in the 30% range. And I think there are some pretty easy arguments you could make if a campaign was well funded, that things that if you believed in them, like early voting that got put into the Constitution, or reproductive rights that got put into the Constitution, or marijuana that got put into the Constitution, if you like those things, you sure the heck don't want to let a bunch of insider politics people get in and rewrite the Constitution, because they could wipe all those things clean from the Constitution. It seems like there is a way to rally people against it to go along and match with their probably already built-in suspicion anyway.
The 2 most interesting things about this to me are, number one, while it would be terrible for the state if the voters did this, it'd be great for me. I will buy an aircraft carrier and I will sail it up and down the Grand River. That's how much money I will make if the voters actually approve this. So I'm really excited about them setting off the chaos grenade if they actually decide to do this. I think the other thing that's super interesting to watch here, there's one really important player in Michigan politics, especially Michigan Republican politics, that actually has an incentive to want this. And John sort of alluded to them. It's right to life, right? If you're right to life at this point, what on earth do you have to lose in pursuing this, right? Everything that you hate has been written into the state's constitution. And so if you're right to life, why wouldn't you roll the dice on rewriting the state constitution? It can't possibly get any worse from your perspective. And so I think it'll be really interesting to see what Right to Life of Michigan decides to do about this. If they decide that they want to get involved in terms of a yes campaign, that puts a lot of Republicans and a lot of Republican interest groups in a pickle. Obviously, a lot of those interest groups are going to ask them very nicely not to do that. But it's not clear that that's the direction they decide to go. And certainly it's an easy case to make to their activists that you have to try.
Yep. And we should point out that Right to Life, the anti-abortion rights group, just doesn't have the mojo that it once did in Lansing. A matter of fact, I think you could even submit that maybe the Susan B. Anthony list is a bigger player on that particular issue. Also, you're not going to have the support of business groups, right?
Certainly not. No, business groups would not want to blow up the state constitution. Mm-hmm. The reason that Right to Life and other anti-abortion, anti-reproductive rights groups would be important to this is while they don't have the political yank with Republican lawmakers, people in Lansing and Washington, D.C. that they used to, they certainly still have a grassroots base that can turn people out, that can gather signatures, that can canvass, that can do all the nuts and bolts stuff of politics. I don't know if that would be enough to get it passed, but it would create some weird political incentives for a lot of people in Michigan politics.
John, I think it's fair to say that ballot questions in Michigan recently have helped to shape electoral outcomes in legislative races, for example. In 2022, the constitutional question of whether to add reproductive freedom to the state's constitution was on the ballot. It passed, and with it, Democrats swept into office with complete control of both chambers of the legislature. The first time in 40 years, there was a Democratic trifecta along with a Democratic governor. So we know that the con is on the ballot for sure, but there are also a number of other questions that are still gathering signatures. We should note rank my vote is no longer. But we know, for example, there's a possible question about taxing wealthier residents and having those dollars go to schools. How should we be thinking about the possibility of seeing a small or really large number of ballot questions in November?
Well, if we look at the track record thus far, first of all, just look outside today. It's miserable. Are you going to stop and sign a petition when it's raining, snowing, freezing, and flooded all at the same time? The likelihood is not real good unless you are just diehard on that issue. So we've already seen the much ballyhooed ranked votes announced they're not going to get the signatures. We've seen an implosion a few years ago in the industry that developed around paid petition gathering because it just became corrupted and a disaster for a lot of candidates. Has that really recovered? So it's a hard slog for them, I think, to get these things on. And the reproductive rights issue that was started at the U.S. Supreme Court, everybody knew what it was, and the Democratic Party and the Governor Whitmer were strongly behind organizing and getting that to happen. It takes a lot of money and a lot of organization. My suspicion is we still won't see a ton of these things happen. But it is a side effect of a legislature that's not really good at finishing things. I mean, the last legislature didn't even turn in their last 9 bills and get them finished. Like they finished on a complete disaster as well. The more those things malfunction, the more likelihood that we could see some of these things succeed. But it really comes down to the cold, hard cash that Adrian talked about earlier for the organization to actually get people in the middle of winter to sign signatures.
That is John Selleck, CEO of Harbor Strategic, and Adrian Hammond, CEO of Grassroots Midwest. Thanks, you two.
We'll be talking so much more. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Rick, thanks, Zoe.
And Rick, before we wrap for today, I want to just quickly jump back to the beginning of that conversation we just had when Adrian and John were talking about the state's economy.
Right.
So after months of no data, we finally got Michigan's latest jobless numbers this week.
Yeah, no data for months because last year's federal government shutdown had closed the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics for a while.
Yeah.
This is data from October, which was combined with November, again, because of the shutdown. So they're still behind. We are still waiting on December's numbers.
But if we're trying to, again, dissect what this economy is going to mean this year, particularly with the elections, what do we know?
Well, it's kind of a muddle. The jobless rate in October/November edged down ever so slightly to 5%. Really, it's pretty much flat. And the two surveys used by the government to come up with that rate of 5%, which is not historically bad, is due more to people leaving the workforce. That is, people who dropped out and aren't looking for work than because more people are employed.
It is interesting to note, though, isn't it, that we haven't seen Republicans and Democrats trying to make a lot of headlines over these numbers. Usually they come out and there's, press releases saying, this is because of us, or it's because of the other party.
Yeah, often. We haven't this time. Maybe they're still trying to figure out what's going on and how to use it.
Well, we are going to dig into that intersection of the economy and the political stakes in this week's It's Just Politics newsletter. You can sign up for the newsletter at michiganpublic.org, and it will be in your inbox every Friday afternoon. And that is It's Just Politics for today. I am Zoe Clark.
And I'm Rick Pluta.
Let's talk again next week.